all of which chatter brings us round to I suspect the reason that. Well, I don't know if I say most of you will be listening. If there's more than one listener, I don't know. But certainly I suspect the film that, the only film on this roster that all three of us have seen, and which I suspect we probably all want to talk about the most anyway, which is Denis Villeneuve's recent adaptation, of the first half at least, of Frank Herbert's seminal 60s sci-fi novel, Dune, the unfilmable novel, which has now been adapted a third time. Scott, I think it's probably fair to say that you have the most skin in the Dune game, for varying values of skin. I don't know, I've not checked the exchange rate of skin against Bitcoin or anything recently. So would you like to introduce us to the concept of Dune?
Yes, and it's all Ethereum these days. Look,
I know. How behind the times am I?
We've said in the past that nothing's unadaptable, but it's also fair to say that some works resist it more than others. Hence, Dune, Frank Herbert's seminal science fiction work, beloved by many, including me, is a rare instance where the best piece of movie or TV it's associated with is a documentary about a failed effort to adapt it, Jodorowsky's Dune. I could talk for hours about where David Lynch's Dune valiantly tried but ultimately failed, although I couldn't say the same about the TV miniseries, which may well hew closer to the text of the book, but somehow misses out on all of the life of it. However, I suppose the question we're here to answer today is, can Denis the Many Villeneuve get closer to the mark? And the answer is we can't really answer it, because one of the first things you'll see on screen, this is Dune Part 1, so we'll see you in October 2023. Oh, all right. For the uninitiated, Dune takes place in the very far future, where humanity is spread across the galaxy under the rule of an emperor, with planets ruled by the great houses, such as Oscar Isaac's Duke Leto Atreides, much respected by the other houses and thus seen as a threat by the emperor. Suspicious, then, that the Atreides are given the lucrative, exclusive franchise to mine the precious drug spice from the planet Arrakis, displacing their mortal enemies, the Harkonnens, headed by Stellan Skarsgård's Baron Vladimir Harkonnen and Dave Bautista's Glossu Raban. To no one's surprise, it's a trap with, well, a series of traps and difficulties, some of which the Atreides staff can deal with, such as their human-computer mentat, Stephen McKinley Henderson's Thufir Habat, Josh Brolin's army head, Gurney Halleck, and Jason Momoa's Duncan Idaho, tasked with scouting ahead and making contact with the Arrakis natives, the Fremen, who are in equal parts feared and oppressed by the Harkonnens, and whom Leto hopes to form an alliance with. Against all this upheaval, Leto tries to bring his somewhat reluctant son, Timothée Chalamet's Paul Atreides, closer into the family business of politicking and planning, as someday all this will be his. While it initially seems like the plan might just be to let the Atreides fail by providing only garbage-tier harvesters, which would be a disaster given that the spice must flow, as it's the only thing that enables safe interstellar travel, before long, a rather less subtle plan of all-out war is unfolded, the Empire and Harkonnens joining forces to batter them, with Paul and his mother, Rebecca Ferguson's Jessica, only just managing to escape into the desert with only their wits, and Bene Gesserit's training that enhances the control over their bodies and power to control the weaker of mind with their voice. And as it happens, they don't get much further than meeting a tribe of Fremen, headed by Javier Bardem's Stilgar and containing Zendaya's Shani, the woman of Paul's increasingly prescient dreams as his powers awaken, before the credits roll, which maybe doesn't sound like a lot of plot to cover 2.5 hours, even accounting for my simplifications and omissions. And, well, while I have to first disclaim that I am not the person to come to for unbiased opinions about Dune, I'm recording this podcast wearing a Dune-themed t-shirt, although that's more of a happy accident than by design. But even had this been a crayon scribble with Villeneuve making pew-pew noises for 2 hours, I probably have still liked it. But the thing that makes Dune difficult to translate is that even in the novel, no one loved it for the basic core of the hero's journey that's been done many times over, or even really for the characters, which, with only a few exceptions, aren't a lot more than job descriptions, if that, even if they are likeably written and, in this film, likeably performed. What people, or at least me-flavoured people, loved about the book was the scale of the universe that Herbert's concocted, some of which is detailed, some of which is vague enough to provoke wonder, and the hints of what's happened in their distant past and our distant future, like why the seemingly singular religion is still around, the mashup of Zen Buddhism, Catholicism, Islam, and apparently every other religion as well, and quite how space travel and technology in general is supposed to work without mechanical computers, all these kind of things. Now, Lynch, arguably, mostly ignored this and focused on providing visual law. The miniseries tended towards lots of characters expositioning at each other and sent us all to sleep. Villeneuve, I think, does a pretty admirable job of threading these needles and giving enough detail to provoke that wonder with words, as well as some jaw-dropping effects work and cinematography that continues Villeneuve's hot streak from Blade Runner 2049. Where his hands are a bit more tied, even if by himself, is the film's structure, as it struggles to reach a natural endpoint after struggling to be beaten into something approximating a 3-act structure. And, well, it's wound up feeling like it skipped to Star Wars and went straight to the Empire, although maybe that's a good thing. I do want to open this up to the floor, as I could waffle on about this in the wider universe for hours, so I'll let you know that, unsurprisingly, I really enjoyed Dune, and while for the reasons aforementioned, character depth and structure primarily, it is certainly not a perfect film. It might be the perfect Dune film. Or half of it, at least.
I quite liked this, but the biggest problem I had was I don't think it did a particularly great job of explaining this to people who haven't watched Dune before or read Dune before. Because I was watching this and like, who's that? Why are they doing this? Why are there no computers? Is there an in-universe explanation for the lack of computers, Scott?
There is, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not.
I can give it to you if you're interested, but it's a bit of a diversion.
Perhaps later.
Yes.
I think, as the long and short of it, not that the human race decided that computers were quite troublesome and caused more trouble than they were worth.
Essentially, yes. There was something called the Butlerian Jihad, which was more of a kind of philosophical thing, where they felt that AI and computers were sort of taking away from what it meant to be human, and so they kind of fell out of fashion. They were like treated with disdain, and that's what happens in the Dune book. If you're insert rant about how Frank Herbert's son ruined everything by turning it into Terminator for some reason and his stupid prequels. But let's skip past that and go back to talking about a film that I actually like.
Yes. I just wonder whether there's maybe like a Battlestar Galactica sort of scenario, but obviously it's not.
It wasn't supposed to be. Depends on what you think is canon or not.
Okay. So the biggest problem was like I was kind of at sea for like who anybody was, like, and it was kind of frustrating. I wanted to know more, so I guess that's good. It hooked me because I didn't massively enjoy it, but I enjoyed it. It was a solid film, and I got to the end of it, and I was like, "Yeah, and tell me more, please. I want the next part now."
That was very much my overriding at the end of it. It's like, my only disappointment at the minute is I want to watch another 2.5 hours of it, and it doesn't exist yet.
I would very happy to do that. And it's rather bold of Denis Villeneuve to have made, or foolish possibly, to have made half of the book and call it Dune Part 1, given that there was no plan or agreement to necessarily make the next part when they made it. Yeah. It was a gamble, which most people thought it wouldn't work because it was Dune.
Yes.
It turned out to actually be hugely successful. So Warner Brothers greenlit it, but that was quite a gamble. And also, it doesn't end particularly well.
No.
Partly that is because they ran out of money. What I'd heard was that because it cost them extra money to make because they wanted to have those ornithopters on set. That caused a budget overrun, and then the film actually ended like 10 or 15 minutes before where it was supposed to. So they're just like, oh crap, we just need to wrap this film up, and it sort of ends with a pointless, inconsequential fight that doesn't seem to say anything, and then come back in 2 years, please, because at that point they didn't know there would be another film, so that's a bit awkward. Yeah, it does look amazing, even though, I don't know why Denis Villeneuve thinks colour doesn't exist.
No, that's not fair. There's lots of colour in it. It's just that any scene only has one of them.
Yes. It's
exactly. Some people have blue eyes, Drew, so get over it.
Yes, I know in the David Lynch version, you can see the blue eyes without everything else being monochrome. So it does look amazing. I love the ship design. It's almost like this film came from the person who directed Arrival, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks great. I didn't much care for the soundtrack. It's one of those Hans Zimmer soundtracks. It sounds like it's mostly made of vowels. And I've heard that several times before.
Yeah. I actually thought it worked really well in Dune. I didn't mention it, but I thought the soundtrack was brilliant in Dune. Really worked for me. Lots of kind of weirdly, kind of very alien sounding things coming out at points as well, which I thought worked quite well for the scenes they're in. Yeah.
Some of it worked, but it's like the more vocal stuff and the sort of throat singing. It's like it didn't work for me.
The film opens with throat singing, and it absolutely gave me a raging boner. Easy. Sorry, I'm in.
I think also I was perhaps again irritated because the cinema mix for it is not good, and I thought maybe it's just the cinema I was in, but I've read online that it's like the cinema mix is. The dynamic range in it is completely screwed up to the point where the loud parts are painful and the quiet parts are inaudible. Like the scene with the box where Rebecca Ferguson's outside the door, like whispering about fear being a mind killer and stuff. In the cinema, you can't hear her. You can barely hear a word she says. Despite the fact that, as I say, the top end of it is deafening. So I didn't have the best experience because the sound mix is bad. In the cinema, the home version is different. Well done there, whoever's in charge of that. Yeah, so I got to the end of it, really quite enjoyed it, and then decided, what I should do is watch the David Lynch one again. Oh dear.
Look, if you're going to complain about the soundtrack in this one, you can't really complain about the soundtrack in Dune, because Lynch's Dune repeats that Toto score so much. It's it's like a form of water torture. I love it, but it's mental. I don't know what they were thinking with it.
I watched that mostly because I wasn't going to read the book. I wanted to get more of a hand up what's going on. It intrigued me enough to make me go and watch that.
Yeah. Oh, if you're going to David Lynch films looking for an explanation, you're doing something seriously wrong.
Yes, I think Jim was doing something seriously wrong there.
Yes.
Denny Villeneuve one. Although, weirdly, what I actually, I don't know, so on a tangent here, going back to the 1985 film, 84, 85, is that film is not as bad as our response remembered. I was quite interested in it, apart from the fact that the voiceover and the constant voicing of inner monologue is, I was going to say intolerable, and intolerable is the word I thought at least 100 times while watching it. But given that I got to the end of it, it can't actually have been intolerable. But
yeah.
And it's weird, a David Lynch film where it's spelling out everything. That's a weird film. But it did strike me that there were a few bits in the 2021 film that feel very similar to the David Lynch one, almost slavishly. Like that Denis Villeneuve was adapting that film rather than adapting the book. I don't know the books, I don't know how accurate that is, but that's how it read to me. Although the one thing conspicuously that Denis Villeneuve didn't put in his film was the terrible, terrible voiceover that explained everything. So I just wanted to punch the screen every time somebody voiced the inner thoughts again. It was driving me crazy. And there were a few changes from that, which makes sense. Part of the reason I went back was, what happened to the Sting character? And I realised that in the original film, the Sting character doesn't actually have any purpose or do anything at all. So it's quite good that they sort of combined him and the other cousin into Dave Bautista.
I don't think they've done that. They'll bring him back for the second film. It
feels like that.
No. I think it explicitly isn't. They don't set it up, but the whole point is that they bring in the Dave Bautista character in the next film will be seen to squeeze the natives of Fremen, the Fremen and all the Arrakis natives, and then they bring in the idea is that they can bring in Fade, whoever the Sting analog will be in the next film as a kind of will be seen as a liberator kind of deal, and they'll do the same thing in the second film with a bit more time to open it up. But there's no particular need to introduce him in the first film. I don't think, but I think they probably should have done. It's kind of conspicuous by its absence. I'm certain they'll bring it in, but in a film where it seems like it could have done a lot more to talk about. Maybe that's why they didn't bring it in. I think a lot of the characters are quite ill-served. I let it get away with a lot of things because the actors they've picked for them are particularly well-fitted and kind of make up for a lot just by bringing their either natural charisma or just their ability to it. Like, I think perhaps the reason they didn't go into much thing about explaining what a mentat is that would be that they've just kind of almost entirely written out the kind of mentat role entirely, whereas they've given a bit more role to Jason Momoa, because Jason Momoa is a big charismatic bastard and he's just magnetic when he's on the screen, and his little interplay with Timothée Chalamet kind of does a good job of humanising both characters without actually ever really explaining what either character does. You know what I mean? Which I guess kind of works for the film. I mean, you wouldn't expect anyone to, like, someone to just stop there and say, here is Josh Brolin. You are the weapons master and head of all of the armies that you see here. What would you like to do with the armies that you are in charge of? And it doesn't do anything like that, which is good. But I think the script could maybe use a bit of tweaking to make that a bit more obvious to someone that's not read the book.
Yeah, although on the upside, Josh Brolin definitely works in that role much better than Patrick Stewart.
Yes.
Tiny amount he's on screen.
Yes.
But actually, they've got a number of really big actors in here to be in tiny roles. I guess with the hope that they would get to make the second part, but Jesus, that's quite surprising. I liked the acting for the most part. Although Stellan Skarsgård is the Baron, that character is weird in this film, but the David Lynch one actually creepy. So creepy's better. But, I started this with talking about Sting just because I've watched the David Lynch thing, and the Sting character is completely pointless in that film. Seems to serve very little purpose. I've completely lost any point I was going to make, so I'll just let Craig speak, other than to say that where the David Lynch film definitely has this film beat, though, is the eyebrow game. Very disappointing.
Yeah, a lot of quality eyebrows in the Lynch one, yeah, for sure.
I think a couple of times I've tried to read Dune, and when I get 10 pages into a book and I'm like, I really don't like Frank Herbert's style all that much here, and then people whose opinions I trust in all other manner of things, and I'm not this is not a coded reference to yourself, Scott, because I don't think we've ever had much of a conversation about Dune besides the 2-hour commentary we recorded a couple of years ago, which I have no recollection of, right? But other people have said to me, oh yeah, you just have to get a bit further into it, by which they mean X number of pages. I don't really want to have to read 100 pages of something to feel engaged by it. So I think the first time I tried to read Dune, I was probably like 12 when I really started getting into like Philip K. Dick and stuff like that, and sci-fi in general, and I've always just bounced off it. So I come to this film with this adaptation with actually very little appreciation and or understanding of the source material, if I'm honest. And I've always felt like that was a real sort of blind spot for me as someone who's always really enjoyed science fiction, because I think it's one of those keystone texts that it's kind of like, oh, you know, I've actually never seen Citizen Kane either, so what right do I have to be here talking about films? And I've never read Dune, so what right do I have to be here on a film podcast talking about Dune? And I honestly think that's probably served me quite well, because there is not a great deal about this film that I didn't really enjoy. And I suspect that might be because I was able to approach it on its own terms. And I remember enough of the David Lynch adaptation to know that obviously he doubled down on a lot of the stuff that you would expect to appeal to David Lynch, like the Guild Navigators. There's a nightmarish vision that you can understand why Lynch wanted to put that on screen. I also completely understand why Villeneuve has decided to sidestep some of that stuff, certainly for this installment. I don't know if we'll get to see them in part 2. On which topic, by the way, anyone who thinks that part 2 was in any doubt as to being made needs to get back on their meds, because there's no way part 2 was ever not going to get made. It's just bananas to think otherwise, frankly, but don't get me started on that. So
this is Warner Brothers we're talking about, you know.
Yeah, no, but that, yes, I wonder what ploy we could engage in order to drive people into the cinema. Well, here's this greatly beloved sci-fi text, which, don't know, we've made one half of it, but I suppose it'll depend whether people go to see it or not, and or sign up to our online subscription service as to whether we ever make the second part. Of course they were going to make the second part. So, yeah, it's just really annoying that we're going to have to wait 2 years to get to see it, because I really, really liked this. And I watched this from the comfort of my sofa. And for a film that's so grand in scope, I honestly didn't feel like I was losing out on too much. I still enjoyed it. I still really enjoyed the spectacle of it all. And by the way, the production design, of this film, if this isn't the pinnacle of production design for movies, full stop, I don't know what other film you would make the case for. I think it was absolutely astonishing. And I think Villeneuve has made what I perceive to be, but again, I'm not speaking from a place of authority on this, but to my mind, it looks like he has made a lot of really good choices about what should be kept and what should be omitted in service of making a novel, which I understand, at least firsthand from the first 10 pages, to be very difficult to penetrate, actually accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah.
I didn't have a great deal of questions about what was going on. I didn't find it that difficult to infer the parts I wasn't clear about. I was able to establish an understanding from things that were happening around, from choices that Villeneuve made, because Villeneuve, for all of his flaws, because he's not perfect, he's done some things that I really, really like and other things that I'm not so hot on, but he is absolutely a director who respects our intelligence as an audience and is really happy to show and not tell. So thank you.
Yeah.
He's made some really, really smart choices, I think, in deciding what to bring to screen and what not to bring to screen, at least for this first part. And I'm trying to think of something that I didn't like about it, which is not to say I was absolutely head over heels in love with this movie, but I really, really frickin' enjoyed it. It did not feel as though it was pushing 3 hours at all. Visually, I know what you're saying, Drew, about the stylistic choice there in terms of the colour palette and stuff. It wasn't a problem for me at all. That's a legitimate choice. And after 10 plus years of having my rods and cones at the back of my eyeballs absolutely saturated by crimson and royal blue and gold, thanks to Marvel, a muted palette with a couple of pop colours, not a problem. I actually found it quite refreshing. The thing that Villeneuve does, which most other directors I can think of really can't get their head around, is a sense of scale. And he's really happy just to take his time and to languish on the sort of grandeur of, I know a lot of people have spoken about, it's like, just like the scale of these like ships gradually floating down to the surface of the planet and stuff. But it's an absolutely legit observation, because if you're going to tackle something like this, you need to be able to convey the scope of it. And I think that's why he has proven to be such a good choice in adapting this. He's got a really firm grasp of how to translate scale to the screen. And I think the fact that I got a sense of that scale watching this at home, as opposed to, I would have liked to have seen it on a big screen, but I knew I wasn't going to get the opportunity. But the fact that it's worked for me on the small screen says something about the choices he's made and his skills as a director. I was going to say, I don't think there is a single flaw in the effects work, that this is like the most consistently seamless and transparent effects work that I've ever seen in a film. But then I think about the, what's the crazy creature, the Harkonnen, is it the Harkonnen spider people refer to it as? That's all legs.
Try that. I can't think what you're referring to there.
What's that weird creature that you only see at the one time, and I'm sure
it's just like one scene. It's in the corner of a room, isn't it?
That weird pet thing, yes. No, I don't remember that being in the book, but it would seem like a strange thing to just put in. But no, that's weird.
Yeah, people have referred to it. I'm sure they've called it the Harkonnen Spider, but I don't, like I say, I'm not speaking from a place of authority in this, but actually when I cast my mind back, I think I might have looked at that and gone, oh, that's a bit of a letdown given the rest of the stuff, but I don't know. I don't think he's made a particularly bad decision with this. Perhaps, quite apart from, like you say, Drew, my understanding of the whole thing about running out of budget due to having physically the ornithopters on set, that was one of those things that when I saw it on screen, the first time that we see the ornithopters and we see them in flight and we see them prepping for take, I'm just like, oh, God, yes, right, somebody gets it. And everything just looks so real and lived in and believable for something which is such a flight of fancy. And you know what I think the pinnacle of this film is? Who among us does not want Oscar Isaac in this film as their dad? That beard.
It's very reassuring, isn't it?
Oh my God. Oh, Oscar Isaac. Why can't we all have a beard of that quality? But do you know what? He's earned it. And that point where he says the line to Paul about, even if you choose not to succeed me, even if you choose not to take on the mantle of the head of house, you'll still be the only thing that I ever needed you to be, my son. Yeah. I'm just, Oscar Isaac. I just wanted to just hug my TV. What a great dad. What a great dad. What a great imperialist father. If you're going to be imperialist, then I guess Oscar Isaac's perhaps the best you can be. There is, I know people often comment on, in the same way that Christopher Nolan is often, the accusation is often levied at him of his films lacking humanity. I think Denis Villeneuve, to an extent, I think you could maybe level some of the same criticism at him, though I don't think he's anywhere near as bad. But there is such a depth of character and warmth here that I wasn't necessarily expecting in this film. Scott, you mentioned Jason Momoa. A bit of a man crush on Jason Momoa in this film. I totally get why my wife quite fancies Jason Momoa. When you see his interactions with Paul, it's kind of like, yeah, Jason, Momoa in this film. What's his character's name again? Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah, the little interaction where he hugs him is like, oh, you put on muscle, have I?
Yeah.
No.
One of
you're like,
two jokes in the entire film.
Yeah.
That joke and the I am smiling thing that Josh Brolin says.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got Oscar Isaac, who you want to be your dad. You've got Jason Momoa, who you want to be your big brother, and then you've got your man Gurney Halleck. You've just said his name, Drew, and I've forgotten already. Josh Brolin, who kind of like, oh yeah, he would be a great uncle. A little bit fascist, but I still love him. I look forward to him coming round at Christmas and getting a bit drunk and saying stuff he shouldn't say. The only thing that I think this film is lacking, in which I hope the second part picks up, is a lot more to do for the female characters. My understanding is that the novel is, if not entirely centred around female characters, it certainly has much more for them to do. But I don't know, Scott, you would be the person to ask about that.
Well, I mean, maybe. How to put it? I think that Jessica Atreides should get a bit more screen time in the second one, where she's gets into her role a bit more, where she kind of becomes more of a kind of soothsayer, medicine woman type role to the tribes that they'll be going on to, and that will kind of feed into it. And Chani will be a very important character, hopefully, in the next one. And she better be, because you don't want to waste Zendaya doing nothing. Which she kind of is in this one.
What is a Zendaya, and what she do? I don't think I had any knowledge of Zendaya coming into this, and then when someone's bold enough to sort of to go by a mono nomenclature, I was like, oh, okay, so you clearly feel you've got some level of importance. I should know you by one name, along the likes of Madonna, but I don't think I've seen Zendaya in anything. Is she an actor? She strikes me as the type of
Spider-Man films, no?
I've not been watching the Spider-Man films recently, no. I've not seen any of the Tom Holland Spider-Man films. I was working on the assumption that perhaps she was a pop star who had turned her hand to acting.
I believe she might
Disney
be as well.
Star or something, no.
Yeah, she's very popular with the youth of today. which we don't know about because we're old. So, yes.
Yeah, I mean, she looks very pretty in slow-mo with like silk gowns flowing out behind her and stuff in the desert sun, but I'm hoping that the second part gives her something more to do. And this is the first time certainly that I've come out of a viewing experience where Rebecca Ferguson has been part of that, where I feel like I actually understand who she is as an actress, as an actor, because I don't feel like she's perhaps been given enough to do in most of the other stuff I've seen her in, and she does at least get some key scenes in this film. And I did finish this film thinking, I wish we'd spent more time with her.
Yeah.
But I mean, all of these things are potentially things which might be addressed in the second part. I've read a couple of articles online where people have said, there's a bit of a pacing problem with this film because they've gotten to the desert too quickly, and now part 2 has got to be all desert, and it's going to be very difficult to make that exciting. Lawrence of Arabia,
Yeah.
What?
The best film ever made, set in a desert, and it lasts 4 hours.
Yes, and it's gorgeous to look at, right?
And you've not even got to the bit where they're riding the sandworms yet. You teased it and you pulled it away from us, you bastard. We'll get that in the next one.
That was the only bit that I thought was a little bit egregious. Was that bit where they're looking through I think they're looking through the binoculars towards the end, and you actually see the dude or the dudette, I can't remember, riding on the sandworm, this thing which has been promised by people preparing the hooks, but it never quite comes to fruition. And then is it Paul who just sort of looks and nods and goes, "Desert power." I just wish that line hadn't been there, that sort of echo of his dad's line, and the sort of like smug smirk, like, "Yeah, I'm going to ride some sandworms, bitch." I wish that bit hadn't have been there. But again, am I looking forward to Timothy Chalamet riding a sandworm? Absolutely. I don't find a lot to fault with this film at all. I just think it's astonishing in terms of its production design. I think Villeneuve has made some really smart choices. I know that I was entertained watching it because the time flew by, but at the same time I was able to appreciate it as a film that clearly understands its source material enough to know that regardless of the parts it might omit for plot streamlining purposes, that it still needs time just to sometimes languish on a shot of a massive ship floating through some sort of interstellar Stargate thing, or gently coming to settle on the ground, or just spending time floating around in an ornithopter, spending time with characters, people doing things like talking to each other in between stabbing each other, all that kind of jazz that, if you're not careful, tends towards character, I think it used to be called in films at some point. Yeah, I just really, really like this. It's not going to trouble like my top 10 favourite films of all time, but as someone who maybe didn't understand Dune all that much to begin with, I still know how nervous fans of that material were about another adaptation, and I really hope they enjoyed it as much as I do, because I feel like it's probably done the source material a bit of justice, and I would like the people who are actually invested in it to feel the way that I feel about it. I really, really liked it.
I can't imagine it being done better, with still having some kind of hope of explaining it to, or having it play to, an audience that doesn't know the book. Things like, as I say, that whole the whole mentat thing. If you start bringing up what a mentat is, that's a half-hour rabbit hole you need to go down as to why they exist and what they're doing, and it's best just to write it out, because it's ultimately not that important to this story. And I think what this did much better than any other adaptation is kind of managing to kind of mesh together that kind of weird mix they have of like feudal structures and kind of weird high sci-fi concepts.
Yeah.
Not necessarily by spelling it out narratively or having people explain it to each other, but by just kind of some kind of family interactions, and then following that up with these kind of really hugely impressive visual vistas that Villeneuve's conjured out of things. There's moments, and look, I'm as jaded by effects work as anyone else, but there's a few moments where my jaw may not have physically dropped, but at least in the metaphorical sense it was. I was kind of going, ooh, that's nice. And it's been a long time since I've seen any film that's had that kind of effect on me. possibly Blade Runner 2049 it might have been.
Can we take a moment though, Scott? Just like when we're talking about a film that looks this good, and I really did love how it looked. Maybe not particularly hitting the right notes in terms of saturation and palette all the time anyway. But the film that looks this good, can we take a moment to hate the poster, which is garbage, because all posters are garbage? It's the same stupid pile of heads that all posters have, including one in this episode, which is the Venom poster. They all look the same.
Yeah.
It's like you take a pile of heads and stick them in a sort of triangle shape. All posters. I hate it.
Not the best given the production design of the rest of it, which is just absolutely stunning. I mean, there's even simple things like there's one scene towards the end where the Baron is doing his floaty thing, because the kind of floating thing was used quite a lot in the Lynch version of Dune, this kind of anti-gravity belt, and it's not really used all that much in this one, apart from that cool scene at the end where and his robes also go down to the floor, so it just looks like he's this amazingly tall person floating towards someone. And it's really eerie, and that's yes, this is another good scene, thank you, Denny.
Although in this film that definitely plays more like magic than technology, which I believe it's supposed to be, but certainly looks interesting. But so I'm still stuck on the poster thing. For a film that looks this distinctive and very much of its own thing, why does this poster look like every other film's poster? Who's in charge of this thing? Where can I get them to kill them?
I think you need to let go of your hate, man. I've stopped being bothered about posters, because honestly, what purpose do movie posters serve anymore when all anyone talks about are trailer reveals and stuff? I don't know. Have you seen a poster up anywhere for Dune? I know we come across it online, and it'll be a thumbnail eventually on a streaming service, but I don't know. I don't care about posters anymore. They are lazy, and it is disappointing, I suppose, but let go, Drew. Let go.
Let go, Drew. Use the Force.
Wrong film.
Same concepts. Lucas stole them.
Exactly. A lot of inverted commas, borrowed concepts. Quite an astonishing piece of filmmaking in a lot of ways. I think at least a couple of new bars have been set, and the stuff that isn't the raising of the bar is still at least on a par with pretty much a lot of the best that you could find elsewhere as it is. So, really frustrating to think that there's another 2 years to wait for the next part. But
Yes, it's going to be a long wait for me, because I really want to see it, but I shall look forward to it immensely, and no doubt we'll rewatch this many times over. And
yes,
if it needs to be said, yes, it has my recommendation, just a mild one. If you've not seen it already, maybe put it on your list.
Maybe give it. Even if the sort of your understanding of the source material of Dune might normally put you off from this kind of thing, and even if you're not a particularly huge fan of sci-fi, like my wife really enjoyed this, and I don't think she was expecting to, but she still came away sort of nodding approvingly and commenting on actually how much she enjoyed it. So I definitely think everybody should take a pop at it, even if sci-fi is not normally your thing. It's not laser gun sci-fi, is it? Because again, like, guns are a thing that doesn't exist in this this universe, laser or otherwise. So, all good in the hood. I really hope, as much for, or perhaps more so for yourself, Scott, than for anyone else, even myself. I hope the next 2 years passes quite promptly. And that the second part lives up to the promise of the first. But